Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be talking about the evolution of the Nintendo handhelds. And of course we need to start it off with the man himself, the man that started it all. One day in 1979 on a train ride home, Gunpei Yokoi saw some individual just playing with their calculator. And I'm pretty sure we've all done this during tests if you are allowed to use a calculator ever. And that's when Yokoi got his very brilliant idea. Of course the Game & Watch was the first console ever to have the D-pad, which was made by Gunpei Yokoi in 1982 for Donkey Kong. There were also a lot of current titles that are on the Game & Watch. Of course, these were very practical times. The Game & Watch actually sort of worked like a calculator. And I'm pretty sure for many Game & Watch fans or Nintendo fans, you already know how the Game & Watch works. Basically, these are all just still images, and to create the illusion of motion, one part of the screen just dims up, and then when the character moves, it just dims down, and yeah, you get the idea. In total, there were 43 million Game & Watches sold. So yeah, Nintendo's very popular with handhelds, even during the get-go. Ironically, Nintendo was celebrating their 100th birthday, so the Game Boy being released in '89 was a very interesting time. When Game Boy was still in its development stages, it was called the Dot Matrix game, and there were some people that actually didn't like the Dot Matrix game. Employees at Nintendo were even called Dame Games, and if you don't know what Dame means in Japanese, it basically means like lame. What a roast. But of course the Game Boy would go on and become extremely successful. It was totally the iPod Touch of the time. Just everyone wanted it. Next up was the Virtual Boy, and I don't think I have to re-explain what happened, because I already made a video on that, so that would be a waste of time just to extend the video. So after the Virtual Boy failed, this made Gunpei Yokoi look really bad, and he was planning to retire. And people believed that he was going to retire because the Virtual Boy did so bad, and Gunpei Yokoi actually planned this a while ago. So just to leave on good terms and to just close the chapter nicely, he made the Game Boy Pocket, he stayed a couple more years at Nintendo, and then he left and did his own thing. And by that he basically made his own video game company called Koto Laboratories. He was working on the Wonder Swan, but unfortunately he died in a car accident. Now the Game Boy Pocket is basically a slimmer version of the Game Boy. The display is not green, now it's more like a calculator looking display, and yeah, it's just way smaller. But during this time, developers were really pushing for Nintendo to make a better Game Boy, because the Pocket, it's basically just a slim. That's like if Microsoft just released the Xbox One S to compete against the PS4 Pro. It just wouldn't work. There was a Game Boy though that was supposed to be released after the Game Boy Pocket. This was codenamed Project Atlantis. Project Atlantis's battery was so powerful that it was supposed to last 30 hours, which even in today's standards is like really good. Not just would it last longer, but it would also be extremely more powerful. It would actually be really close to being as powerful as the N64. But of course this console never came to be, and instead we got the Game Boy Color. Now this was initially released just to sort of buy Nintendo time to make a more powerful Game Boy. And one of the oddest things though about the Game Boy Color is that there's no backlight, so it just looks really odd trying to play games with it. But there was a Game Boy though that was released that same year with a backlight, and it was called the Game Boy Light. Now why didn't they put this in the Game Boy Color really beats me. The Game Boy Light just had black and white, so it was just a Game Boy Pocket with a backlight. Eventually in 2001 the Game Boy Advance was released. This also didn't have a backlight. And if there's one thing to note though about all of the Game Boys, is that they're all capable of doing backwards compatibility. Even with the Game Boys that can make color, they can actually convert some black and white games into color games. Like for example this Mario one that I showed earlier on the original Game Boy. As you can see on my Advanced SP, it works great. And speaking of the Advanced SP, this is the first Game Boy to have a backlit display with color. So in 2004, which may or may not have been inspired by the Game & Watch, the DS was born, which to date is the best-selling handheld console of all time. It had a microphone, it had the dual screens, which one was a touchscreen, it had a lot of amazing games, and it was backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games. And at the time it had an incredible feature which was just amazing to me at least. And it was a feature that allowed you to talk to other people on it from a very close range. So in the classroom, if your friend is like all the way in the back and you're all the way in the front, you can connect and talk. And it was called PictoChat. And I'm pretty sure a few of you may have remembered that. That truly was like amazing and revolutionary. Also, there was a feature called Download Play, which allowed you to play with other people. Sometimes you didn't even need to own the game. You just needed for one friend to own it and you can all connect your DSs. Also, you can just play the game by yourself. If your friend owns it, then you can just download it and sort of have like a little demo and play it, which is actually a pretty good idea to sell the product. So then in 2005, 1 year later after the DS, the Game Boy Micro came, and I don't really know what to say about this. For the most part, besides the screen getting better, it's just a small Game Boy Advance. But to some people, the screen is a little bit too small, and I can tell why. I've never seen one in person, but I think by the images you can just tell that, yeah, the screen is pretty small. So because it didn't sell well, in total it only sold 2 million units. This was sort of the thing that ended the Game Boy, and Nintendo wanted to focus more on the DS because the DS began picking up.
It is not new technology, but it is a brand new look.
But then 2 years later, in 2006, the DS Lite came out, which was basically a slim version of the original DS. It looked a lot better, it was a little bit smaller, but still had a good screen, and yeah, it was still backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games. For the most part, it was basically just redesigned to look a little bit more minimalistic. Also, it was $20 cheaper than the original DS. And next is the DSi. This one has a lot of advancements with the software, and it added a camera, which was not for your professional photography. It was a little bit more of just something to goof around with. And also, it is the OG filter maker, before Snapchat. But of course there was the Game Boy camera. The DSi also had its own store called the DSi Shop, which actually recently is now dead. And it also had something called Flip Notes, which was really cool. You could basically make little animations. There's also a voice changer, which I guess that's pretty decent. And there's an SD card slot, so your game data is going to be easier to transfer, unlike the previous DSs. Developing the DSi actually could date all the way back to 2006, when the DS Lite came out, which is a little bit odd. Felt like the DS was just going to turn into some sort of smartphone that you release every year. And the DSi's size was actually supposed to be very different. Now, as you can see, the DSi is the first DS to not be backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games, but actually on earlier models, it was backwards compatible with Game Boy Advance games. It was also supposed to have a larger screen, and it was also supposed to have 2 DS card slots. But Nintendo resized the console and made it what we see today. And there's nothing really much to say about the DSi XL. It had a better battery life because it's bigger, you know, the screen's bigger and stuff, but for the most part, that's basically it. But I do have to compliment, it does look like a beautiful product though. And now on to the 3DS. Nintendo has a very interesting history with experimenting on the idea of 3D. It can date all the way back to the Famicom 3D system. Of course, that had stereoscopic 3D, and mostly there were only a handful of games that came out in 3D, and the Famicom 3D failed clearly because barely anyone even knows what it is. And of course there was the Virtual Boy, which also flopped. But now Nintendo felt was a good time because 3D was becoming such a popular thing at this time. Like I said before in my Wii U video, during the 2009s and 10s, people really did believe that like everything would be 3D, like your phone, your TV, anything with a screen. Of course, we know today that that was just a kitschy, shitty trend, but back then, that was the future. So Nintendo added 3D to their DS, and it was a pretty clever name, honestly, the 3DS. I gotta give them props for that. And it had 2 cameras on the back for 3D images. Clearly, this won't work with anything else. The only way you can view them in 3D is with the 3DS. The cameras also worked well for augmented reality games. Yeah, once again, it wasn't really needed. It was just there because it looked cool. The other thing that's new is the circle pad. I don't think I need to explain anymore what it is. Then there was the 3DS XL, which once again, there's not really much to say about it. It's just bigger and it looks a lot better. The buttons are redesigned. Yeah, that's all there is to say. So then a year later, Nintendo released the 2DS. Now really the audience that Nintendo was trying to get were people that were not insanely rich and people that did not like the 3D. And also this was sort of for young kids, and basically what Nintendo was trying to aim for was little kids getting their first console, their first introduction to Nintendo in a very cheap way. And it sort of looks ironic that it's just being called the 2DS because it's basically just a DS. But that's mostly just because of the 3DS, so they have to now brand it differently. It's also the first Nintendo handheld to not have a clam design since like the Game Boy Micro. So then in 2015, Nintendo added some more features to their 3DS, and now it's called the new 3DS. It added 2 new little bumpers and this thing, and also the 3D has been advanced so that it has face tracking, so the 3D is more accurate. And yeah, it just has a better design, honestly. It looks really beautiful. It also has the ability of putting amiibos on it. And this year, the Nintendo Switch came out. I honestly, because of how new it is, I don't think I have to explain the features. Even the name itself explains what exactly it is. And in addition to that, Nintendo brought back the clamshell design for the 2DS with the new 2DS XL. Once again, there's no changes to it, the design does look different, and yeah, people are loving it. And I do think that's a really good alternative if you just want to play 3DS games in 2D on a bigger screen with that clamshell design at a very cheap price. It's actually the price of the original DS, $150. It's crazy how much has changed for Nintendo's handheld line. We've went from having basic minigames to having a full console in your hand that you can take anywhere. I always had a feeling that this would happen, and I'm more than sure that a lot of people have had that same feeling. And it's only gonna get better from here. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.